Gemini, don't put me next to those two guys. Jeez. Gemini, they're like 6'6", and they're like billionaires. Shut up. Crypto exchange funded by Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss has filed confidentially for an IPO. Put me next to Pomp for an IPO in the U.S. A press release on Friday said listing is expected to occur after the SEC completes its review process, subject to market conditions. The news follows a blockbuster debut, Bob, for stablecoin issuer Circle last week. That stock soared in its first 2 days of trading. It's up again today in the pre-market. Pomp is here to talk Bitcoin and other crypto assets. Is Anthony Pompliano. He is founder and CEO of Professional Capital Management. Did you know Circle was going to do this?
I did not expect Circle to do this, but before we talk about that, you're the best looking of the three up there, so don't worry about it.
And of course, it's really the best looking of the two, since they're basically the same.
No, look, I think with Circle, there's a really big kind of shift on Wall Street, which is they are looking to figure out where's the intersection of cryptocurrencies and traditional finance. And obviously, stablecoins, I think, is one area where they've said, hey, not only is this something that the market wants in terms of the free market of users on the internet, but it's also something that we can benefit from ourselves as well. And you hear many of the large banks and financial institutions talking about using stablecoins themselves. So it's something that is touching on crypto, but it's something that they understand and they can use themselves. And so I think maybe a word of caution is that every crypto company that now tries to go public may not get the same welcome. It may be more of a stablecoin story than it is a crypto story. But then there's companies like, Gemini, which are great businesses and seem to have done really well over the years. And so it's really just going to come down to not are you a crypto company or are you not? Are you a good business or not?
So tell us about Gemini's business.
Well, I think with Gemini, one of the things that they've always said is, look, they want to be a regulated U.S. financial institution, right? And so they've run ad campaigns all across the country doing that. They've really, I think, listened to the users and said not only they want to have the right interfaces, they've come out with this crypto credit card that gives crypto rewards back to users, very popular product. And so I think that what you're starting to see here is a meeting of traditional finance and crypto, right? If you look at exchanges, Robinhood is a traditional brokerage exchange. A very fast-growing segment of that is crypto. If you look at Kraken is a crypto exchange that's trying to add U.S. equities. And I think companies like Gemini are saying to themselves, well, what other financial services can we offer to our user base? And this credit card that they came out with is a good example. And I think you'll see all of these exchanges continue to do this in the future.
The Robinhood markets really built up last week on the expectation of going to the S&P 500. It was down more than 5% earlier. Now it's off by about 3.3%. Weird moves like that don't faze you much, I guess.
Coming from the Bitcoin world, a 3% move is, just par for the course.
Yeah.
But look, I do think that we have an entire generation of investors. I call them either self-directed investors or independent investors. Retail, it now owns something like 36 or 38% of U.S. Stock in the market. It's the highest percentage that they've ever owned. These people are used to volatility, and a lot of it comes from the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency world. But now you're starting to see volatility trickle into the U.S. stock market as well. And obviously things like tariffs on, tariffs off, and other kind of geopolitical events are leading to that volatility. But what you're seeing is that retail has convinced themselves they are just going to buy the dip. And as they continue to see markets go down, they buy the dip, and then we get those recoveries. And I think that's why you see institutions sitting on the sidelines and not having as much exposure to U.S. equities as maybe retail has had this year.
So kind of a babe in the woods on, we all are. Obviously, it's such a new technology. But so stable coins. Let's say you get a stable coin backed by treasuries that you use the Ether backbone or something. Doesn't that make the case to use Bitcoin as a transactional utility for that? Doesn't it take that away to some extent? And then you've got Bitcoin just stuck with a store of value or a gold analog rather than actually being what you use, for transactions across the globe. Does it make it less attractive?
Well, I think it's a great question because because Bitcoin, I think there's three things that people want Bitcoin to be. They want it to be a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of account. See things priced in Bitcoin eventually. In order to get there, what we are seeing is that Bitcoin is succeeding and the US dollar is succeeding. They're both strengthening together, and it is the weak fiat currencies that are kind of falling at the feet of those two. Now, one of the things that stablecoins have brought to the market is there's a lot of people around the world that say, I would like to use Bitcoin as a savings account. I call it a digital savings account. I would like to spend something that is not going to be worth more in the future. And so I'll use the digital dollar and these dollar stablecoins. And so if you think about today, the average finance user, they have a savings account, they have a checking account, and they have a brokerage account. That's what we're basically seeing recreated in the digital world. You're saving in Bitcoin, you're spending in stablecoins, and then you are going and you're speculating on whatever assets you want in your portfolio. What I think the big question becomes, and I don't have the answer, I don't think anyone does yet, is as we continue to see the destruction of the purchasing power of the US dollar, are we going to see people start to price things in Bitcoin? Now, I don't think that's something that's going to happen in 1, 3, maybe even 5 years, but I do think that there is a growing group of people who say, look, this thing called Bitcoin is ultimately going to be a store of value, as it already is, but it will become a medium of exchange as well. It just needs to get to a point where the world all agrees on what is it worth. And if you think in 2018, the world thought it was worth $3,000 a coin. Today, the world thinks it's worth $105,000 a coin. It's going to continue to go higher, and at some point it will reach some market equilibrium. And then when you see that switch over into, okay, now things are priced in Bitcoin, I think that's kind of the hyper-Bitcoinization that the Bitcoiners are waiting for. But there is a long path to get there, and the sequence right now is, why would I want to spend my Bitcoin if it's going to be worth more in the future? Right? I want to spend the dollars that are going to be worth less in the future.
How many stable coins based on the dollar do we need? And is Ether the best blockchain network to carry it on? Can it be carried on a Bitcoin blockchain? See, I'm telling you, I'm a bird in the woods.
Look, there's a number of different stable coins that have different kind of twists to them. So if you look at Tether, for example, Tether has really said, what we want to do is we want to take the US dollar, which is one of the best product market fit products ever created in human history, and we want to bring it to people in the emerging world. They have something like over 400 million users. I think they're gaining 30 million users per quarter. Just crazy numbers. $13 billion in profit, over $85 million in profit per employee. Amazing business. Circle has said, well, let's go and actually be the U.S. regulated financial institution and try to go get distribution through exchanges like Coinbase and others. So both of them are attacking a market from two different ends, and I think that both will end up having a business. But then you also get a number of stable coins that say, well, what if we take the interest that we're earning from the treasuries that we're holding and we start to return that back to some of the holders? And you get all these different twists, and we'll see what ends up happening.
How important is auditing in all of this? Because, you know, a while ago, this is back in 2016, 2018, there were concerns about Tether. I think it was the CFTC or somebody had said that it was only backed like 20%.
They still didn't give us a great answer last week.
What's the reality of the audit? I mean, I know that Michael Saylor has said there are concerns about some of these full outright audits, but how does an investor feel confident with
I think
this?
there's three things that are really important. The first thing is I would not want to compete against Tether. Tether has a massive balance sheet. They have been excellent at executing, and they have a fantastic business. The second thing is that there was a bunch of this FUD around, hey, do they have the money that they say they have?
Right, because they're supposed to be backed one for one by U.S. dollar for every
There was a watershed moment when Howard Lutnick, when he was at Cantor Fitzgerald, came out and he said, I know that they have it because I've seen it. And there's an entire story, which at one point I think the Cantor Fitzgerald team will come out and say of how they went and they actually audited it. But now Tether even has an attestation that they put on their website where you can go and you can see exactly where are all the funds, what is it sitting in, and then not only a breakdown of like this is cash and cash equivalents, but also how many treasuries do they own, how much Bitcoin is in there.
Not just Tether, though. I mean, beyond Tether, is this something that the major, like a PwC or some of the other accounting firms can vouch for? What would make you feel comfortable as an investor?
I think a lot of those firms at first were very nervous about this because it was new, right? They just didn't understand it. They frankly probably were like, you might pay us some money, but we're taking a lot of legal risk in coming out and doing this. That is quickly changing. Obviously, Circle is now a publicly traded company. I think that Tether has done a fantastic job of going and meeting with regulators and politicians and really kind of hoping to explain what is the business, how does the technology work. And now you're starting to see a lot of these auditors, these accountants, and various kind of regulatory-friendly service providers.
Because in the early days, it was a bit of the Wild West, and there were a lot of these sort of situations where it wasn't backed up. It wasn't what people said. I know we've come a long way from that, but how do you feel completely comfortable as an investor?
Well, you know, I think there's two different groups of people, right? I think there's the crypto community who, frankly, they don't care. Right. There is a subset of the community who just says, hey, look, I'm basically holding Bitcoin or some token. I need to go from this exchange to another exchange. I need to pay someone. It's a quick transaction. If later on something happens to this token, it doesn't matter. I think that is a very small group of people today. And I actually think now everyone is saying, look, this is really, really important. We need to figure this out. And so these companies are probably more transparent than most of the traditional financial system in terms of day-to-day updating of what are the reserves, where do they sit, what are the different service providers that will actually offer them stuff. Right. And so as an investor, I think you just have to ask yourself, am I willing to take whatever risk I perceive to be there? I happen to think that there's very low risk to the USDCs and USDTs of the world. Some other people may think that there's more, and they'll kind of act accordingly.
All right, Anthony. You said the dollar's been strong. It depends on really where you're sitting. Other people think it's been the worst start to a year.
Well, this year is different than last 5 to 10 years.
The last 5 to 10 years, it's been dollars and Bitcoin, right? Exactly. Especially if you own something else in a country with really high inflation. You work your ass off, you got nothing in a year. Really.
There's two things that people in the world want. They want dollars and they want Bitcoin, that's for sure.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, Anthony.